Photography. Let's talk about it.
Hello. Welcome back to the channel. I previously recorded this whole entire video.
It just felt a little bit too,
I don't want to say pretentious, but just like a little bit too much. You know what I mean? It felt very serious. And while these are deep conversations that we're going to have in this video, I think that these types of conversations are best left a little bit more casual so that it doesn't feel like instructions, if that makes sense. If you don't know who I am, welcome to the channel. My name is Jared Thomas Tapey. I'm a social documentary photographer and educator here in New York City. Today's episode... Hi, Milo.
Today's video is going to be the first episode in a new segment here on my YouTube channel. New in the sense that I used to make these videos maybe four years ago. If you don't know, on my social media platform, I have 5 reoccurring segments that I've kind of constructed, each one kind of portraying to a different aspect of photography. There's crafting a photograph, which is all about making you a better artist and taking you from just taking pictures to crafting a photograph with your own unique vision and voice.
And then there's the creative connection, which is bridging the gap between visibility and creativity. And it's all about the business aspect of photography. Then we have Life Through the Lens, which is about the historical figures in the past of photography and what you can learn from them now.
Then there's Marks of the Maker, which are all about my own personal philosophies about photography and kind of like my own process for how I look at photography. And then last is Tools of the Trade, which is all about the gear that I suggest and things that can help you streamline your workflow a little bit better. So today's first episode is episode 1 of Crafting a Photograph. And before we start off, I want to say that all of these things that I'm going to mention today come with a certain level of subjectivity. Not everything that I say is going to be an objective truth, and take each one with a grain of salt.
This series is specifically designed to help you better understand yourself as a photographer and as an artist in general. A lot of these topics are a little bit more philosophical about artwork and about photography, and they're things that I want a lot of new photographers to understand about their own process and things that I've learned in my own process as well. Another little disclaimer is that a lot of these things that we're going to discuss today come down to intention, right? That's a huge thing in photography in general, but especially in street and documentary photography. Intention is key, and having the ability to know what you're doing helps you create that intention. Today's first episode is going to be the top 5 mistakes that I see new photographers make and how to fix them. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first mistake that I see a lot of new photographers make is shooting everything wide open. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean shooting all of your images at f1.8 or f2.8 at the lowest aperture possible that your lens allows. I think that a lot of new photographers really love that bokeh, that nice shallow depth of field, but what you have to understand is that when you're shooting this way, it really takes the subject away from the background. I mean, it's just like right in your face, you know what I mean? And again, everything comes down to intention. And if you're meaning to do that, I think that there's a time and a place for that, 100%. I mean, if we look at the work of Gordon Parks, for example, one of his most notorious photographs, he's probably shooting that image at maybe 2.8, but I would have to assume maybe f4, having the American flag in the background be blurred out to portray a good background, and then our subject crystal clear in focus. The difference is that he intended to do that, whereas I feel like a lot of new photographers kind of sit at a lower f-stop almost by default. And there's a couple reasons why I think this is. One, maybe they just don't possess the technical ability to be able to understand, how your f-stops work, and that's totally fine. Everybody starts somewhere. That's not a big deal. And then second, I think a lot of new photographers see these images on social media, right? Typically, these types of photos do really well on social media. The engagement is usually pretty nice just because it's so in your face that, it's so centered that this is the subject that we're discussing, right? And it's just like front facing usually some sort of portrait or something like that. And at first glance, it's a powerful image just because it's kind of attention grabbing, you know, it's just at the forefront. In terms of street and documentary photography, right? If you're shooting everything wide open, you're probably sacrificing sharpness and context and composition just to put that subject in frame. So here's why it's a problem, because at f1.4, f1.8, your depth of field is razor thin. And that means that if your subject moves even slightly, or if you miss focus by an inch, then that's how you end up with a bunch of blurry images that you can't use. And what's even worse is that, especially in the realm of street and documentary photography, you lose all of that context that's in the background, all of those details that create depth in your frame.
Now, again, this all comes down to intention. If this is what you're meaning to do, by all means, keep doing it. But if you find yourself just kind of naturally residing at a lower f-stop and you're wondering why you're not really hitting your focus points, well, then we have to fix that issue. It's also of my personal opinion that shooting at a lower f-stop kind of is an easy way out. But when you shoot at f8, f11, you have to focus on everything within the frame to create a compelling image. The storytelling aspect of photography comes from the context within the frame. And when you take that out of the equation, you're left with forcing the viewer to see what you see. And the beautiful part about street photography and the beautiful part about documentary photography is that it's not up to us as the artist to create the intention for the viewer. It's our job to simply show our viewers what we see. Personally, I think that there should be a level of nuance to your photographs to make the viewer read the photograph instead of simply just view it. And that's how, you get this sort of trend on social media of just a lot of images that are just point blank, it is what it is. And there's no sort of context within those frames. So the fix is relatively easy. It's more so like an exercise that I want new photographers to try and do. And it's compare and contrast. So instead of using f1.8 as your default, go up the scale of your f-stops. Shoot at f6, then at f8, f11, f16. So you shoot some images at f4, then at f6, then at f8. Then when you get home or you develop your film, you're looking through Lightroom, you compare and contrast and see how each image differs in terms of storytelling and in terms of context. What you have to understand is that these higher apertures give you more control of the story that you're trying to tell. And they force you to compose your frame with intention, which ultimately, I believe, makes you a better artist because you're more attuned with the world around you and you're more aware of what's going on. So here are some examples of some different focal lengths that I've shot at so that you can kind of see the intention behind each one. Like I said, there's a time and a place for everything. And if your intention is to have a blurry background, by all means, make your subject the sole subject in the frame. But as it pertains to street photography specifically, and documentary photography, shooting somewhere between f8 and f11 are kind of the go-tos. I get a lot of questions on what my typical settings are whenever I'm out shooting. And it, of course, depends on the conditions of the weather outside. If it's a bright and sunny day, I'm usually sitting at somewhere between 1/1000th of a second at f8. In the cloudier or shadier spots, or if it's a shadier day, I'll sit between 1/250th of a second to 1/500th of a second and try and do my best to sit around f8 as well. Sometimes it's just not possible, and I'll usually bump myself down to maybe f5, f6, just to let in a little bit more of that light without losing too much of that sharpness. But ultimately, all of this can change based on your focal length, and that brings me to mistake number 2, and that's relying too much on autofocus. Now,
This sort of mistake is more so geared towards new digital photographers. Obviously, there are film cameras that have an autofocus feature as well, but for the most part, most digital cameras have a autofocus feature. And again, this all comes down to intention. And when you rely on autofocus, you're kind of surrendering that intention to the camera's sensor, because that's really all that it has. A camera in general does not know what you're trying to accomplish, and cameras have so many different things that they can focus on. And when you rely on that, sometimes you miss the shot because the camera sees one thing while you're intending to see another.
Now, this goes back to my very first video that I posted on Instagram that kind of blew up a little bit, talking about zone focusing, and a lot of street photographers throughout history have used this. And there's a few principles to zone focusing that you have to understand. And the first is that it really depends on what focal length lens you have. So for my Canon F1, I use a 28mm lens. I also have a 50mm lens. And at 28 millimeters at f8, anything past 2.5 feet is going to be in focus. So really all I have to worry about is ensuring that my subject is at least 2.5 feet away without having to touch the focus ring at all. For a 35 millimeter, you can usually sit at 3 feet to 3.5 feet away at f8 and make sure that everything is in focus. But if you're using a 50 millimeter lens, which is my second favorite lens right now, that focal length is so much tighter, and so it requires a lot more manual focusing. Zone focusing on a 50 millimeter lens is much harder than it is at a 28 millimeter or a 35 millimeter, and you have to be much more intentional and ready to change your focus on the fly. Being able to understand your focus rings and your aperture and switch to manual focus creates this habit of being more intentional with what you're trying to accomplish. Relying on autofocus, again, can just sometimes, not all the times, I do think that there are times in which autofocus is helpful, but say you're trying to photograph a gesture, something small, very intimate happening in a scene, yet your autofocus just focuses on the faces, and now you've missed your shot. So a couple things that I suggest is switching from a wide focus option on your digital camera to a single point AF. Then you set your little marker, and then wherever that marker is, it'll focus in on that. But really what I suggest is practicing manual focus. Now, this can be a lot easier if you're just getting into it, if you don't really take it out and do street or documentary photography at first, but do some more portraiture work, do some more landscape work, maybe some still life work, and really pay attention to where those focal ranges are. Another practice that I suggest is, instead of walking around while trying to get your focus right, stay in one spot for a little bit and then just kind of fish for photographs. Now, these first two mistakes were sort of the technical mistakes that I see a lot of new photographers make. I want to talk a little bit more about some philosophical or mindset shifts that I think a lot of new photographers need to understand. Which brings me to mistake number 3, which is ignoring the principles of photography. And this one is very nuanced, I'll say that straight up. And it, again, all comes down to intention. And it also comes down to your level of understanding of the principles of photography. So, principles of photography, if you don't know, their composition, lighting, subject. Think of things like rule of thirds, an understanding of light, and an understanding of what a good subject is, right? The first one that I really want to talk about is light, because this principle specifically seems to be one of the more problematic things that new photographers kind of latch on to. I'll admit that lighting is a very, very important aspect of a good frame. It's the mood, it's the language of your frame. If you're not paying attention to where it's coming from, how soft or how hard it is, how bright it is outside, how it's shaping your subject within your image, then you're missing the shot before you even take it. And again, this all comes down to subjectivity of what you like within a frame. Me personally, I don't love harsh sunlight. I don't love harsh, especially front-facing sunlight. It creates really hard shadows on faces directionally, kind of makes everything more cavernous. I'm more
of a soft directional light kind of guy. But where I see a lot of new photographers kind of fall flat is that maybe they do have a good compelling subject or story going on within the frame, but the lighting is doing something that doesn't really help push that narrative. And I think this also comes from a lack of understanding of how shadows are just as important as the highlights within your frame. The shadows help tell the story just as much as good light does. So we fix this by asking ourselves some questions before taking an image. One thing that I always try and ask myself is, where is the light coming from and what is it doing to my subject? You have to think of light as a sort of character that, for the most part, has a lot to say within your frame. It can hide something, it can force the viewer to see something. You can even use it as a major compositional tool. So having a better understanding of light really does help you understand how to frame your subject better. There are some classic photography books that I suggest. Cape Light by Joel Meyerowitz is one of them, of course. That is a beautiful representation of understanding light. Stephen Shore, Fred Herzog, Colorworks. Those are two other very great artists that have a mastery of understanding light. We could say William Eggleston as well. These photographers have mastered what it means to understand light. And so if you want to understand light better, I suggest you look at these artists. Not to toot my own horn either, but I feel as if after I learned about these artists, it really helped me complete my first book, Unveiling Savannah Shadows. So here are some images from that. Now, this fourth one, I would say, is the most important one. This is the one that I think a lot of new photographers just simply have not grasped, and that's okay, because that's the whole point of this series, is to help you better understand yourself as an artist and speak with your own artistic vision rather than just go with the masses. And that is that a lot of new photographers do not understand what it means to have a compelling subject and create a story within a frame. I also want to say that I've made all of these mistakes, right? Every photographer that you look up to have all made these mistakes. It's a journey. It's a process of understanding yourself as an artist. When I first started out, I wanted to be William Eggleston. I saw all of his photographs, and what happened was that I was just creating half-baked images that had no real purpose to me. I just was photographing things that I thought looked cool or that I think William Eggleston would have shot. And I'm not William Eggleston. I don't have his creative vision. I don't have his eye. So there's no point in trying to copy somebody else and try and copy their subject or their story, because then it comes off as disingenuous. The first point is that cool colors and nice framing are just simply not enough, right? Now, I see this all the time, and it kind of goes back to the last point about lighting, where it is an image of beautiful light, right? And let me paint the picture for you. It's got two very harsh shadows and a very small sliver of elegant light. And it's always the silhouette of a person walking through that small sliver of light. And then they post it up, and people love those. And they are, to a certain extent, good images, right? They have a basic understanding of lighting. They understand how lighting works as a form of composition, but there's nothing being said within that frame. It's literally just a photo of their technical expertise and their understanding that two very hard shadows and a beautiful light with the subject in it makes a good frame. But when you look at these images, they lack depth. They lack any form of communication as to what's going on other than the fact that there's a sliver of light and I know how to put a subject in the middle of it. This is my own personal opinion, but I don't find these images compelling. I don't think that they're anything special. They don't say anything. That's that. But I know photographers that have made full careers off of things like this. So who am I to say if I find it successful or not? Obviously, there's a certain demographic of viewer that likes these types of images. Personally, for me, though, that's just not my thing. I've always believed that if the viewer doesn't understand what they're supposed to feel, then the image just doesn't land. And when I look at images like that, I don't feel anything. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel, so it doesn't feel successful in my eyes. The second sort of mistake that I see a lot of new photographers make is they have trigger finger and they just shoot everything that they think looks cool. And again, I've done this in the past, especially as I'm first learning these principles of photography and I start to be able to recognize these things. My thought process when I was younger was that, oh, I'm recognizing these things, so they must be good images. And that's just simply not true. Just because you can understand, again, the technical aspects and the principles of photography and you're able to communicate that within the frame, that doesn't mean that the frame is effective. And ultimately, I think that I was just taking photos of things without really asking myself what the photo was about. It was more so a superficial representation of what I was seeing rather than really bringing the viewer into the world that I was in.
But as I've gotten older and more experienced, I've started to ask myself these three questions when I'm out shooting. The first is, what's my subject? And really breaking down what my subject truly is. What does it mean within the frame? The second question is, what's the feeling or emotion that I'm trying to convey? Because a good image should convey something. And then the third is, what can I remove to make this image stronger? Sometimes that means simplifying the background, and then sometimes that means not taking the image at all. And having that discipline and that restraint to see something cool or a person that's dressed cool, but understanding that within the frame, the subject just doesn't work. It doesn't actually create a compelling image. It doesn't tell a story other than this person looks cool. Having that discipline to not take the image means that you're growing as a photographer and you're understanding the artistic vision that you have. But the big thing that I really want new photographers to ask themselves is, why is this important to me? What am I trying to convey by taking this image? Why does this subject matter so much? Which leads me to the last mistake. And if the first two mistakes were technical and the second one were more so mindset mistakes, then this one has to do with your final process. And that mistake is that a lot of new photographers shoot and move on. They're, again, very fast with how they shoot, especially in the post process of image selection and image editing. And this mistake I made very often when I was first starting out, because as a new artist and you start to understand these principles of photography more, you get excited, you're invigorated, you have a sense of adrenaline rushing through you when you're out shooting because you're seeing the world in a different way than you have before, and you're excited about the new techniques and the education that you're getting about artistry. And so you shoot 1,000 images and then you come home and you immediately go to Lightroom, or you immediately start developing your film and you start editing everything right away, and you still have that sort of adrenaline high from when you're out shooting. And so your vision gets a little blurred and you become a little bit more subjective and a little bit less objective on what makes a strong image. I remember I would do this all the time when I was shooting Unveiling Savannah Shadows. I'd spend all day shooting and then come home and immediately cull through 1,000 images and boom, post them up right away without really understanding how to sequence my images or what these images were trying to say or what I was trying to convey to my viewer. I was just so excited about the fact that I was understanding these things and I wanted to share that process. But a lot of new photographers in general don't stop and ask why their images work or why they don't work. But understanding why certain things work or why certain things don't work is how growth happens. It's kind of like the recovery process for athletes. That's when the growth happens. So here's the habit that I've created that fixed that mindset for me. Whenever I'm out shooting, when I get home, I very rarely, unless it's for coverage, immediately look at the photos. I've even stopped whenever I'm shooting digital looking at the screen on the back of the camera because I just don't want to see it, because then that creates these different mindsets that you have to change something. Then after a day or two passes, I'll go through the editing process slowly. I'll look at each individual photo. And then at the end of my selections, I'll choose 3 frames that I really like and then 3 frames that I don't like. And typically I try and stay away from technically bad photos because there's an obvious reason why those photos are bad, because I didn't technically shoot it the right way. Then I ask, why do these 3 images really work, and why do these 3 images not work? Is it composition? Is it subject? Is it framing? That sort of process trains you, and it builds taste over time. And the same thing can be said about revisiting your archives, which I've made social media posts before about the importance of having an archive. Going back through, over time your taste changes, so never discard photographs. Always put them in the archives, because years go by and maybe you go back through and you realize that there's some hidden gems in there. But ultimately, the way to fix this is by taking your time, being intentional, and challenging yourself as an artist to understand your creative vision a little bit more. So that's going to do it for this first episode of Crafting a Photograph. Ultimately, again, all of these things come down to intention, and it comes down to subjectivity and having a better understanding of who you are as an artist and your own unique vision and voice. I also just want to again remind you that just because you're making these mistakes doesn't mean that you're a bad photographer or that you're a bad artist. It's just simply that you're making these mistakes. And it comes back down to that age-old saying of, if you don't even know the questions to ask, how can you ask those questions? And if you don't even know what to be aware of, how can you be aware of these mistakes? So hopefully my intention is not to come across as a know-it-all, but more so a guide to understanding who you are as an artist and the questions that you should be asking yourself to improve as an artist. And while these are impactful things to talk about, I don't want them to come across as me telling you what to do. So I hope that this level of conversation is a little bit more intimate and a little bit more easy to process. And again, I've made all of these mistakes, and just about every single photographer that you may look up to has made these mistakes, and honestly probably still do make these mistakes from time to time. Of course, we curate ourselves online to show the best, but behind every great image is 1,000 bad images. And that's kind of the whole purpose of crafting a photograph, is to understand that we have to think with intention as an artist and to question ourselves more than we question anything else. This is just the first episode of Crafting a Photograph, but there will be more videos on each of the 5 series that I mentioned before. My biggest goal when I was first starting off on social media wasn't just to show you who I am as an artist, but I feel as if I have this responsibility to, not really a responsibility, but desire to connect with other artists who want to better themselves at their craft and who they are as a person. And it's my own personal philosophy that the more you understand yourself as an artist, the better of a human being you become. Because in this line of work, specifically of street and documentary photography, you have to operate with an extreme level of intention and an extreme level of empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and convey that sort of meaning to your viewer. And so when you become more intentional, you become more empathetic, you become a better human being, a better member of society, kinder, and ultimately that should all be our goal. I also just want to say thank you. Last week we were at 20,000 followers on Instagram, and now in a week we've hit 22,000 followers. And I think that's another reason why I care so deeply about sharing this sort of philosophy and this information, because I've always wanted to connect with other artists who take themselves seriously, especially within this medium. And oftentimes I've felt very secluded or isolated from the photographic world around me. But seeing that this community of people that do want to better themselves as an artist and are resonating with the lessons that I've taught brings me a lot of hope for the medium in general. So I can't thank you enough for choosing to not only support me, but support your own growth. This video has a conjoined Substack article that you can read as well. You can also listen to my podcast, The Creative Connection. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok. You can check out my portfolio. And on a quick side note, ultimately I want to do photojournalism. I deeply want to be able to work full-time as a photojournalist. So if you know anybody, or if you have any sort of connection to an editor or a publication that's looking for new talent, it would mean the world to me to send them my way or something of the sort. So yeah, that's going to be it for this first episode of Crafting a Photograph. I hope that it didn't come across as pretentious, because again, that's not my goal.
It's not my intention to act like a know-it-all. I just want to share what I've learned that I think has made me a better artist, so that hopefully you can understand how to become a better artist. So as always, get out there and get shooting and keep moving forward.